Hello and welcome to another episode of Literary Liberation Podcast. Today we will be discussing, analyzing, and reviewing Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller. Kristen and I have adopted a Palestinian family that is currently still stuck in Gaza. Mohammed's neighborhood was bombed and killed 22 members of his family, leaving him responsible for his 4 younger siblings who were pulled from the rubble. We have their family's GoFundMe linked in the description, and they are very close to their goal. Please donate below. Don't forget there is a link below to sign up for our free newsletter where you can get more information and updates about us and the podcast. For more content outside of the podcast, please check out our Instagram and TikTok at Literary Liberation and Twitter at LitLib Podcast. I'm your co-host Mariah, and you can find me at Hungry Rye on all social media platforms.
I'm your co-host, Kristen. You can find me at KRXX and on all social media platforms.
If you're on Book Talk, you know of Song of Achilles.
If you existed on Tumblr in 2012, heard of Song of Achilles. This book predates Book Talk.
Yeah, I was looking at the ratings, and I didn't realize just how popular it was. I think this may be the most popular book that we have reviewed so far because it had 1.5 million ratings with an average rating of 4.33 stars, which is pretty crazy. I think the other book that we read that probably had a lot was like Haunting Madeline, maybe The Silent Patient. I don't remember reading anything like, and that wasn't anything. That was like 500,000, so about a third or half as much as this one. Like, this is the real deal.
But I think that might be just because this book has been out since 2012 or something that it was published. We haven't done.
Yeah, so it's been out for about 12 years.
Yeah, so I think how many readers a year is that then?
I don't know. We'd have to look at like the stats on like when it got popular, because who knows if when it came out initially, if it got a lot of popularity.
I remember seeing it on Tumblr, to be honest.
That's pretty crazy.
Yeah. But like,
because 2012, I would have been a junior in high school.
Or I think I still would have been in elementary school, or I would have been going into my freshman year. Or middle school. Sorry, not
Kristen
elementary
and I
school.
Have
I said elementary school. I meant middle school. I meant middle school, not elementary school. I was not in elementary school in 2012. I was definitely in middle school. Going into freshman year.
I was like, Jesus Christ.
No, middle school. Middle school. I was not on Tumblr in elementary school.
Thank God. Miss Madeline Miller has 150,000 followers on Instagram, so, I mean, a pretty decent following. Grew up on the East Coast, went to Brown University for her Bachelor's of Arts and Master's of Arts in Classics. I don't know what that means. Classic literature, I'm assuming, but it just said classics. And I guess she tutors Latin and Greek and also Shakespearean somethings. Shakespearean history, Shakespearean theory, writing. I don't know, to high school students. And Song of Achilles is her debut novel, so...
Bro,
that's
imagine your teacher being
novel.
Being like a famous author. That's crazy.
Right?
Your high school teacher, like, oh yeah, I just have like 1 million reviews on my book. Whatevs. That's crazy.
I don't know if she's doing anything else. I don't remember if she's still going to school. I think she lives in England now, perhaps. I looked at her politics, and we don't usually just go out the gate and talk about politics, but she did have 2 posts on her Instagram where she was showing stuff that like her mom wore in like the 1970s to protest for women's rights.
I don't know. You didn't.
I don't know. It was those are the only 2 things I can find. I didn't actually find any controversies surrounding the author, which is nice. I appreciate that off the bat. Because I don't particularly enjoy reviewing authors that are extremely controversial.
I know this is like completely subjective and also like not really what we do, but was her Thanksgiving liberal vibes, or is that what you got? Or
yeah, I would say she seems like maybe not like a moderate Democrat, but like just like your stereotypical
like a
run-of-the-mill liberal,
or like more.
I don't even know. maybe a Hillary, like, I'm with her type liberal.
Okay.
This is all just speculation. I
This is just
didn't see
I just wanted the
anything.
vibe. I didn't look up anything about Madeline Miller, so I didn't know the vibes or anything. So that's what I was mostly interested about. Usually, how we do the podcast is that one of us will end up doing research about the author, and I think he usually ends up being the person that liked the book the more research about it.
Yeah. Which, in this case, I think I rated this book higher than Kristen did, which was not. I
Expected?
didn't anticipate that.
Yeah.
Very unexpected.
You
Because,
finished
like,
it
the whole
before me
premise of the
too.
book is like up Kristen's alley. Kristen is big. Percy Jackson, Rick Riordan, Stan.
Can't see
So like the whole story upon we don't even really need like the summary. It follows, I think, a pretty true story of what
Greek
like
retelling.
Achilles.
Yeah. It's just like
that's what it is.
Retelling where it's not even like a retelling, where it's just like she kind of like is telling the story in modern terms, where you don't have to be, it's not reading like Homer's the Odyssey or the Iliad or what. I don't remember which. I think the Odyssey is.
The Odyssey follows Odysseus,
And he's in,
but I think the Iliad has the Trojan War.
I don't know, but Odysseus is also,
I don't know. I didn't read the Iliad. I just read the Odyssey when I was in high school.
Then look it up. Story of Iliad follows the great Greek warrior. So this is like basically just like a retelling of the Iliad. Then is probably what I would say is, as someone, but like from my knowledge, I guess. And then I'm wondering then if Circe is going to be like a retelling of Odysseus.
It could be.
Like
I'm not sure though.
Well, because I know that
it.
like Circe is like I think they're lovers. But it's
I don't know.
interesting because like I like Greek mythology, but I like the more, I don't care about demigods. That is my truth. I don't read about the demigod stories. I read about the god stories. I like those. Heracles.
Yeah.
I don't think it's that interesting. Perseus is boring. I mean, like, I know like the basics of these characters, hero stories, but it's never been like, I'd rather read about like Zeus and Leda.
Yeah, so if you ever read like a retelling, do you gravitate towards like the gods?
Yes.
Like it has to be like that center. Because I do like a Hades and Persephone like retelling.
Yeah, and then I'm not big on Hades and
Core. I like the tension.
I mean, I can respect it, but I feel like I just prefer like the more like overarching, the bigger picture of it, like following Zeus and Poseidon, Artemis, like the Olympian is more what I fall into, rather than, because Hades is not considered. Just saying.
Yeah.
So like I prefer the more Olympian side of the story in Greek I'm reading.
Period.
Yeah. So that could be why I also did not love this as much. Too, because like I don't like hero stories. Like I think Chiron is kind of boring, controversial.
Which we can get into like the praise and criticisms. Like a lot of people, if you've been on Book Talk or Book Tumblr, I suppose, like before Book Talk was a thing, the number one thing I saw of people's reviews of this book was that it was absolutely devastating. It was heartbreaking. It was beautiful. It was a queer story. It was just lovely. But then we get into the criticisms because I had only ever heard of the praise.
Yeah.
But a lot of people said that it was misogynistic depictions of the female characters, which I can agree with.
There's not that many female
someone
characters.
Also said it's true,
which
and
is
even
true in Greek stories too.
Achilles' mother and her depiction and how she was villainized despite her being sexually assaulted was very frustrating. And then the other ones, Alaris, was that her name? Well, I don't want to get too into the spoilers. I'm getting ahead of myself.
We'll just wait.
But like throughout the story, like Achilles' bisexuality was erased. People felt. Some people thought it was boring. The story falls flat, and a lot of people said that the characters were awful. And
I
yeah,
think
that was
characters.
really funny.
I think characters can be bad, and you can still have a good story.
But was this one of them? Is
I mean,
the
I
question of the
liked
hour.
it. It wasn't. I think
Okay, let's get into your rating. No spoiler rating.
the
Kristen, what
problem
did you rate
is,
it?
I think it is overhyped in that people act like it is a life changing, most beautiful like thing that you've read, and I think everything that I ever read will always and forever be Babel. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, the way that Babel changed my brain chemistry has not been yet replicated by anything that I've read. I mean, I've only finished it in December, so it's not like I've even been like reading, like, it's not like I've read that many books since reading Babel. Like, I've read maybe about like 30 books since then, so it's not even like major to find like something like that that'll change your life. But I do think that it's out there, and I think Song of Achilles is advertised that way when maybe necessarily it is not as life changing as I expected it to be, so it made it fall more flat. Like, it made it where it wasn't. Where
It makes me worried about reading something like A Little Life because I see it. Everyone's like crying, sobbing, throwing up over like these books. But people did the same thing with like Kingdom of Ash and News
yeah.
Flash. It sucked. So
And it's like kind of like Manacled as well, which I know is a fanfiction, not a book. But I think it's still relevant enough because I feel like there's a big section of book talk that does talk about like fanfiction or like Hermione. And I read Manacled and I went into it again, not with necessarily high hopes because I don't read Harry Potter fan at all.
no, but it's like unavoidable. Unavoidable. I have seen it on my For You page so many times, people talking about Manacled,
And you don't
and
even
I
like
don't even watch
Harry
or read
Potter.
anything Harry Potter. But people are just like, even if you just read this as like a romance, like fantasy type book, like this is it. This is the book, the staple, the standard. And Kristen did the Lord's work and actually read this
I read
behemoth.
that monstrosity and I did not shed a single tear. I did not tear up. I did not get sad. I was very upset because Mariah was sending me these videos of these bawling, crying. They're like, after they finished reading it, and I finished recording. I literally did a before and after recording of my reaction. I was like, damn, because I think it'd be fucking funny if I'm crying, like, because Babel made me feel that way, where I cried. Movies tend to make me, like, I'm very emotional whenever it comes to watching movies. I will tear up at even, like, the slightest hint of, like,
Like
something.
Iron Claw. We
Yes.
both
Bald.
devastated.
Yeah.
That was awful.
Yeah. But for some reason, most of the time in books, I feel like it never comes across as extreme.
No, like the Jin's daughter was the only thing that's really like got me like choked
That's
up
been,
since Babel.
yeah. And it wasn't even like compared to Babel. Like, Babel, I had tears. Like, it was like actually full of tears. While the Jen's daughter was just like, my eyes watered. And maybe a single tear fell. But it wasn't even like, it was nothing. It was like so minor compared. And I'm not somebody that's like necessarily above crying. You know, it's not like I'm so edgy and different. I don't cry. Like, I get sad and I cry because
Sometimes the impact just doesn't land and it's
yeah,
frustrating.
because I can like feel the intention and like I want it to, but I feel like you in books and mediums they're so different. Where like I was watching I literally just watched this movie last night, Turtles All the Way Down. It was a John Green book first, and in the book, it was the movie felt so caricature-y because it was very similar to the book, and I like the book, but books almost have to have more extreme emotions and more extreme actions, talking and like expand upon this because whenever you're reading it and imagining it within your own imagination, you imagine it much smaller then a movie you see it acting out and it's so much bigger than what you originally pictured. And so whenever I was watching Turtles All the Way Down, the movie, even though I just finished the book and enjoyed the movie felt like a caricature of the book because it was so blown out of proportion because it was matching the book's vibe. Whenever I think it needed to be scaled back, which I think is like how Song of Achilles is, where I didn't get the extremities of it because it was so good.
And I think this is like our segue into the spoilers. I rated it higher before we get into it. I really liked how it was written, and I think it makes sense given the author's background, like why it does read like a classic in my opinion. The overall pacing, but it doesn't give what I wanted it to give, so I think I rated it a 4.5. It's still a beautiful book. Would I recommend it to anyone? I don't know.
Depends
Maybe.
on what you're interested in. Like, I think if you're interested in a Greek mythology, Greek retelling, if you're interested in the vibes of, like, if you like Hercules' story and, like, I feel like you would like Song of Achilles, especially if you are looking for, like, I feel like this is one of the biggest, like, MLM books that have been popularized in the 2010s and the 2020s, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing, but I feel like I could imagine that there are better things.
And we're willing to get some recommendations if anyone has them, because this just had so much promise and it was such a letdown. And I was very excited to read it, and it just hopefully Cersei delivers more. I know it has a lot more receptions, so we are going to read that and review it for the podcast, but it's just a matter of when. I don't know when we're going to get to it.
But because, like, and then also, like, I feel like we're talking about this very negatively whenever the fact is that I think it's easier to talk about negatives and something that you like or that you, like, enjoyed rather than it is easier to talk about the praise, the things you love about it. But I just think that just because we're talking so negative about it does not mean we hated it. We never want to read it, or, like, it turned me off in Madeline writing. I think it's actually beautifully written, and I think it was a nice read, even if it was slow in some parts and not the perfect babble. I still enjoyed it.
It was enjoyable, pretty lighthearted for the most part. There's some intense scenes, but nothing,
Nothing that I
you
felt
can kind
like
of just casually read this.
I feel like if you're already especially into, like, Greek mythology and, like, it's nothing more extreme than, like, a regular story,
A Greek tragedy.
Yeah.
Right? Isn't that what this is, like, categorized as? It's
I'm
like
sure it is, yeah. Which I don't know if maybe it could have been more impactful, too, if we did read, like, the Iliad beforehand, or, like, instead of just knowing, like, the passing of, like, Achilles, because, like, me and you both know, like, the basic of Achilles. We didn't just know, like, the in-depth intricacies of it, and I still don't know how accurate actually, that's not something comparison to, which could
that is our downfall as readers. Although we both have,
I literally have it right here,
the Odyssey and the Iliad.
Like, I literally have my book.
I think I have it, like, tucked right here.
You can see Homer, big as fuck, right there. That's literally the Iliad and the Odyssey in a book set.
All right, now we can get into the schmeat of the book. I think one of the reasons that I found this book not as impactful is because Patroclus and Achilles, they have literally like 18 years together.
Yeah, that's a long ass time.
It's a very long time. They meet when they're like 8 or 10 years old. They're very young. Patroclus is originally of nobility, loses his nobility, goes and lives with Achilles, and then Achilles takes him on as his, like, friend, but also, like, partner, whatever that was considered.
Yeah, like a
right, because
not like
he
a
has
servant,
to have
but like a
right hand man.
There's like a word for it. Some of the stuff kind of gave me weird vibes too, because there is some, but it's not very detailed, but it is a little bit, and I know, and this is something too that I think is more like because of the times that we live in now. So, like, even though they were 16 in the book, I know that's more like
It was still really weird
Yeah.
reading like intimate scenes with minors. That's
Teenagers.
a very big turn off.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Not particularly my favorite thing. It was fine. So if anyone's like, "Oh my god, does it have smut?" Technically,
It's not like
if you
very
want to call it
intense where
that.
you're getting like, it's not like pages long. Like it's maybe like 2 paragraphs. But I do feel like the paragraphs are descriptive enough to get a little bit uncomfortable with it. Which I don't think sex should be necessarily an uncomfortable thing to read about or discuss. It's just because they happen to be 16, 17
We're
when it
adults
starts.
reading about
Yes.
teenagers in our current society. And this also was written in 2012, so it's not like it's the Iliad
Yeah.
or the Odyssey where it was written many, many years ago.
Don't cite the deep
Um
magic to me, witch.
I
I
will
was there
say
when
this
it
was
was
like
written.
Kristen and I did have a bit of a disagreement in
Oh,
terms of some character decisions. So at one point, Achilles gets taken by his mother to go to an island,
so he doesn't have to fight
gets
in
married
the
off,
Trojan War.
but then has sex with like the nobility's
Daughter.
daughter, gets
Who,
her pregnant.
because
Right,
he,
there's a lot of factors that are going into this.
yeah.
But it's Patroclus's decision. Like I understand Achilles was like told he had to do this so that Patroclus could know where he
He was.
was. But is the fact that Patroclus afterwards, because Achilles doesn't want anything to do with her, is like, well, I'll just like sympathy fuck you. That was weird. That was so weird.
I
I
don't
didn't
necessarily think
understand
that
it.
it was like the right like if it was me, I would not have made this decision either. But I'm also saying that I don't think it was necessarily like completely out of left field decision well either. Like I do think, because I think similar to Patroclus saw, I don't know her name, Diomedes, something like that. Dio something, whatever her name is. Um, he saw a girl that I think was very hurt and offended because Achilles did not love her, want to be with her, or anything like that. Where she is probably used to getting everything she ever wanted because she is the daughter of a king. So she is probably not denied things much in her life, but then technically now she's being denied the love of Achilles. And Achilles is very harsh to her. He won't talk to her. He basically, like, he shows her that, like, he only had sex with her just to get Patroclus there, and possibly, like, he was never having sex with her to love her. And I don't think that necessarily women of that time had sex with people that loved them, but maybe they thought they could. And I think that's a lot of things that, like, a lot of women and people like that, they do. That's why you crave to have like an intimacy with someone, is because you want them to love you and feel the same way about you as you do to them. And I think he saw some of his mother within it, and so I think that is very also Greek, with like Oedipus and things like that, where,
Well, I would have said Freudian, but like
well, that's where it comes from though, is the Oedipus complex.
is
Is
it?
Yeah, so the Oedipus complex is like, I'm pretty sure it's Greek, where it's like basically this dude, like, he was there, this king and this queen got a prophecy that was like, your son is going to kill you and then have sex with his mother and marry his mother and become queen. And they had this boy, Oedipus, and they're like, what the fuck? We don't want this to happen. So they, like, I don't know if they, like, abandon him or whatever, or basically he ends up getting adopted by another family and then, like, in a whole new town or whatever, in, like, a whole new city, so he doesn't even know these people or whatever. And then he ends up, like, I don't know if, like, joining the war or whatever, but basically then he does end up growing up and father, because it's like a neighboring kingdom. And then because he, like, killed the king, he's now the king, and takes the king's wife, which is his mom, but he doesn't know that it's his mom. He obviously, like, rapes her and like that because that's Greek tragedy. And then they later find out that, like, and then he's like, oh my god, you're my real mom, I'm carving my eyes out, and she like kills her. So that's like the Oedipus that's like the Oedipus story, which is where like Fortean gets that idea of like sons inherently want to fuck their moms or whatever, like, you know, like that's where that comes from.
All right.
So I think that is one of the reasons why I can see it parallel within Song of Achilles, because of like, you know what I'm saying, like, because
I can understand that. It's still fucking weird.
Yes, obviously, objectively, yes, but I think for the story and for the writing, it makes sense as like a Greek tragedy. It's kind of like get all of those references in that you.
What was the other thing? We both were in the same agreement with how Achilles' character developed, and he's not likable.
Yeah, we hated that guy.
Not good. I didn't understand his reasoning for most of his things that he did. The only character that I really resonated with and I wish had more screen time, so to speak, was Belarus.
Yes.
That was her name, right?
I think so.
Or something similar. They have very complicated names, and I'm sorry I don't have the thing up in front of me of all of their names. I should have written them down in the pronunciations, but I did not do that today.
Yeah. Achilles is the only name that we like 100% know, because there's like Patroclus. I think that's how you say his name. But like, I'm telling you, I did not know this dude's name until probably the last half of the book. It finally clicked in my brain that the main character's name is Patroclus. Before I was just imagining it as like guy, which I think shows that like I don't even know if Patroclus is actually in like this of Achilles. Like I don't know anything about it like that.
But her character arc, like she gets taken away from her village and becomes a slave, and then she has like Stockholm syndrome, and then like ends up falling in love with Patroclus.
Which I don't necessarily think that Patroclus was a bad guy in this story at all. I don't.
No, not at all. He was kind of just like too passive. Like, I think that was frustrating. Like, he kind of just got walked all over.
I think he was a product of maybe not necessarily like the time, but the product of like circumstances, where he's somebody that kind of just was taking what was given to him, and he never fought for himself or his thoughts, and the only time he did was for like Achilles' love and affection. Nothing else ever mattered as much. But
other than that, though, there really isn't a whole lot. There's like this time where you get all of this great development, antagonisms of their relationship building when they're young, and then they go to war, and then it's kind of stagnant.
I don't know. I think I like the second half of the book better than the first half of the book, actually.
Really, I like the first half of the book. I thought it was really nice. I liked the build.
I mean, it was sweet. I didn't like hate it. I was like, oh my god, this is so boring. I just felt like it made me not. I feel like I read the second half of the book faster than I read the first. That because I feel like their time with Chiron was not very interesting. Them being like, I like the beginning when he went to that thing to like try to get Helen of Troy's hand, whatever. I like that.
That was interesting.
And then I like the part where he killed that little boy. But then he went to like Achilles' family, like estate, and then it kind of like fell off for me until after they get to the island. I think it.
I'm trying to think if there's anything else though. Like this book, it's confusing why it's gotten so much positive traction when I don't think it's all that
a bag of chips
revolutionary. It was really nicely written, but
I wonder,
the fact that everyone's like, you have to read this, it's gonna change your life. But even the ending, it was not that impactful.
I think it's more to do with the timing of whenever it came out, 2012. How many, like, this is before gay marriage was legal in the United States. So I think it is different circumstances where this may be the first time a lot of LGBTQ plus people and young LGBTQ LGBTQ+ people saw representation in a popular book.
Yeah, which I can totally get that. Like, that makes sense. But the fact that today it's still being treated the same as it did in 2012, I can understand from 2012's perspective. But in 2024,
I think people still view those things
in 2023,
rose-colored glasses.
that
It'll
could be.
always have, because it was the product of its time and was the first of its kind. Almost,
I mean,
where I'm
being
not
like
even
nostalgic.
saying, yeah, I'm not even saying that like Song of Achilles was like the first MLM like book ever written or that, but I do think it was one of the most popularized at the time, and I think it is a product of its time. And the fact that in 2012, whenever it did come out, it was much more impactful then, and I think people look back on like their past and they enjoy whenever they was young. I mean, there's a reason why Harry Potter is still as popular as it is. The Hunger Games having a and all of these like nostalgic fandom things will always be popular. I think it even
I
like
can understand.
explains like how like Lord of the Rings is so big and impactful because it was like the first fantasy series of its time that popularized like the ideas of like orcs, that and hobbits that have objectively changed the fantasy genre for the better. Where I think this also could be viewed in LGBT writing, like it changed the trajectory of queer books. Right, prop them up.
Having it in the mainstream like popularity in 2012, because this was around the time that like Twilight and whatnot was also very popular. Like,
Yeah,
I think 2010 is when I started reading. No, 2010 I was a freshman in high school, so 2008
yeah,
to
because I
like
think
2010 I think the movies were coming out.
2005 I think is when the first Twilight book came out.
I don't remember. I do remember. So in 2012, what books were popular in high school was Hunger Games, because all of those were coming out. Divergent was super
Yeah,
popular.
I think Divergent was a little bit later. I think that was more like 2015, 2015. I mean, Percy Jackson
I
was
think that's when
obviously.
the movies came out, but people were reading the books. I remember seeing them.
I think we could do an episode about Divergent. Have you read it?
I have not.
It's bad. So bad. I think we could do a really good critique on it. To be honest,
That'd be fun.
I didn't finish it whenever I was in high school, but I loved the first one, and then I read the first two as an adult whenever I was like, probably, you remember whenever I like reread Twilight and like Game, like the first time, like back well, I think this was before I met you whenever I was reading them, but like whenever I was first like getting back into reading, I read the first idea.
Was it? Do you have anything to say about the ending of this book? I think this is where everyone was supposed to get sad, which I get it. Like, Patroclus dies, and then
Yes,
Achilles dies, but Achilles gets a tomb with his name, and his son that
the
he
hater.
won't let Patroclus's name be put next to Achilles. He's like, my father was a hero, and so
He doesn't need the slave's
Patroclus is
name
like
next to
stuck in
his.
limbo.
Yeah, never getting the afterlife, which I don't think is necessarily an accurate representation of like the underworld in Greek mythology and stuff like that, because in Greek mythology, and I'm sure Madeline Miller knew this because if she's in Greek and Latin, where she understands that like whenever someone dies and they go into the underworld and then they get judged on whether or not they're going to or the feet of Asphodel, Tartarus, or wherever it is, these people go based on whatever they're judged on. They're based on their choices in their life, or whether or not they can be like reborn into a hero or something like that. But I think it was a interesting diverging from the actual like true Greek idea of that of being an. I mean, me personally, because they kind of do get like their happy ending where they're like in the world together, their happiness and stuff like that. Where I feel like if I were, where I think it could be more tragic where they don't get that afterlife together. You know, because
Yeah, they should have. I think if it would have just ended,
and you never know.
right, rather than Patroclus like telling the mother of Achilles the whole life story, all the details to the point where she finally accepts her son for who he was, which was nice and sweet, but it did kind of inhibit this big emotional reaction. That was kind of just
I think the main thing that hit for me for this was the ending whenever Patricia is dressed up like Achilles, rallying the and he getting his hero moment. That is the main thing that like hit for him. Where I was reading that and I was like rooting for Patricia and the good that he was begged Achilles to go out there and rally the troops, stop these innocent men being killed because he wanted to keep living in a selfish thing. And I do think Patroclus was selfish in that as well, because that if Achilles killed Hector, then he would die himself, and never they always say like, oh, Hector never did anything to me. Well, Hector kills Patroclus. Never. Technically, that situation could have been avoided, and Patroclus could have lived a full life even without Achilles, even though he may not have wanted to, because of the choices. Where I feel like he could have accepted his death, where instead he is reduced down to these, and I don't like that character. Even though I do think, like, obviously it's tragic, it's beautiful, but I do think that, like, disingenuize anybody. People are more than just what they love. They are more, like,
yeah.
And I think
Because I did see a criticism where people were saying that like Patroclus or Piss was he only existed for Achilles. Like
and to
that
push his
was
story.
his character up until the very end. Which was what you were talking about. And I do think that was frustrating because he's a good boy when he's a kid.
Yeah.
Very well intentioned. He's
Young,
just
naive, clumsy, too hard on
going through
himself.
life.
Yeah. And I think that can really represent, like, teenage experience and being young and being like that. But the problem is that gets reduced down to boyfriend. And even in the end, even if that's all he wanted to identify as, I feel like that's not how someone by his proximity to Achilles. Where it almost makes it feel like if you're in a duo, whoever's the most popular, sorry, they're the better one. When even objectively, we know as the readers that Patroclus is better man ever been.
It kind of reminds me of how like Karl Marx's wife, Jenny, is just treated like Karl Marx's wife in as though she wasn't a theorist and a revolutionary in her own respect. And the same thing with Lenin.
Mm-hmm.
Like they just get dubbed like Lenin's wife or Marx's wife or like like they don't have their own thoughts and autonomy, and it's really frustrating seeing this in this type of book because it is fantasy. Ultimately it's fantasy, and we don't for sure know, but Kirsten and I don't know that this
based on any type of reality.
So loud. It's not based on anything to us as readers, so this is how it's reading.
Yes. And I think, I mean, and one thing is that this is not a very long book. It's like 300 and some change, 360 pages, I think. Yeah, 369. And to me, anything less than like 500 pages is a short book to me. And I feel like, especially being a Greek, which I don't know if that's an unpopular opinion, anything less than 500 pages is short to me. But I think that there was still room where she could have written another 100 pages and that maybe would not have drowned out Patroclus' story. And I think that's one thing too, even with the title of this book being The Song of Achilles. And I think that it's such a, and I don't know, and this could be like maybe Madeline Miller. She could have been like commenting on like society or like about like this book. This book being titled Song of Achilles, and but actually following Patroclus and his story and things like that, and then the overarching being like that, where she's like critiquing like the only reason why anybody even picked up this book is because it says Achilles, because Achilles is such a known Greek hero. and that is her also.
It makes you wonder
that.
if like Cersei's probably is going to be the same way, where it just follows like Odysseus.
No, but I don't know if Patroclus. I didn't do research on what it actually.
It was a beautiful book. It was written well.
Yeah.
It just didn't hit the mark.
We definitely agree that we do want to read more Madeline Miller. I don't think she's a bad writer in any way, shape, or form. It's definitely not like one thing to like. It's not really. I don't think it's a strong enough like. If it wanted to be like a social commentary on something, I don't think it was. Does that make sense?
That too. I think that may have been that fundamental difference between something like Babel, which is our default like 6-star review that we base everything off of.
Yeah.
It just doesn't do enough.
Yes. Which I don't think. I mean, I think there will be something that we can compare to Babel one day that'll be like as life changing to us as Babel, but we haven't found that yet. And so as we look for that book, we read these and experience with our limited view. That's how we judge, how you compare and contrast things we love and enjoy. Because even though like Song of Achilles wasn't as life changing as Babel was, I still found things that I do love. Maybe not as much as Babel, but it's still like comparatively, and I just don't think this is something that even compares.
It's book talk. This is why we make the videos we do, because we see all of these videos of people recommending these life-altering books, and
we'll see about that.
Read a lot of them. I've read a lot of them, and I'm like, okay, bet.
Yeah.
And it's not always the case.
And I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing either in books and novels. I think that would make Babel feel less special if everything could just be as good as it. But I think it's always good for, I think, people to have goals. Because I know
we're on the hunt.
I know it has to be out there because I see some people discussing books. And it always makes me, anytime that I find like a book that I love, it's scary to try to find something better than that. You want to find something better than that, but at the same time, you also don't want. You know?
And that yields a reading slump.
Yeah. But, I mean, we were both kind of in a slump, too, after we finished.
Yeah. It was very consuming. It's different. I don't know. I don't know why. I mean, maybe because, like, you kind of have this emotional buildup, and I didn't get that emotional release, so I didn't know where to go.
Something else. I do think, I mean, it makes me excited. I'm excited to read other of Madeline Miller's work. I think this was a beautifully written novel, and I would recommend it. I mean, if you're listening this far, you probably already read it, but I think even if you're like...
Let us know what you think, though.
Yeah.
If it changed your life, you've gone this far, you've read it. Did I miss something?
Yeah. I'll reread it in 3 or 4 years, probably. Like, I could definitely see myself rereading this in a couple years and then having a new opinion on it, because I reread books all the time. I literally reread books all the time. I literally just finished Turtles All the Way Down, that John Green book. I literally read that whenever it came out in like 20, and I hadn't read it since, and for anything that happened to it with it, and I reread it, and I ended up liking it more, I think, than my original read of it. I'd love, because have you read any John Green?
Never. I see them at the Goodwill all the time. Always like Paper Towns.
Paper Towns. Tyler loved that book.
I see that like every time. It's like John Green books are always at the Goodwill. Thank you for listening to this episode. We appreciate it also.
Yes.
Subscribe to the newsletter. We put book talk drama stuff in there and other stuff that we've been doing in our day-to-day lives that affect like the podcast and our worldview. Yep. Just other general fun things that we don't generally post.
And my cat. I don't talk about those very often, but I don't think there's anything else for either of us to say. Thank you and good night.